Welcome to Murder Mondays, where we analyze some of the most heinous monsters to ever walk the face of the earth, providing comprehensive case overviews in a bite-sized, digestible format. We last left off with the murderous spree of Ted Bundy across the Pacific Northwest. Tonight we pick up in August of 1974, when a second acceptance from the University of Utah Law School brought his bloody operations down to Salt Lake City. Upon arrival in Salt Lake City, Bundy was devastated to learn the courses were too difficult and completely incomprehensible to him. Disappointed and embarrassed that he lacked the intellectual capacity of his classmates, Bundy turned back to something he knew he could do well, raping and strangling a hitchhiker in Idaho whose remains are unidentified till this day, on September 2nd of that year, about a month after entering the course. 1 month later, on October 2nd, he abducted and murdered 16-year-old Nancy Wilcox in the Salt Lake City suburb of Holiday. His string of murders continued at a blistering pace, as 2 more teenage girls went missing that month, one on the 18th and the next on the 30th. Both 17-year-old Melissa Smith and 17-year-old Laura Ain had been beaten, raped, sodomized, and strangled with nylon stockings. Bundy would return to both bodies post-mortem, shampooing their hair and applying makeup to their rotting corpses. But he would soon make another mistake, as he learned live women were not nearly as easy to handle as his corpse brides. And on November 8th, less than a mile from where Melissa Smith was last seen, Bundy walked into the Fashion Place Mall in the city of Murray and approached 18-year-old Carol DeRanche, identifying himself as Officer Rosalind of the Murray Police Department, telling her someone had broken into her car and that he needed DeRanche to come with him back to the police station to file a complaint. As Bundy drove, the observant young woman declared he had turned onto a road that did not lead to the police station, causing Bundy to immediately pull to the side of the road and slap a handcuff on her wrist. A struggle ensued, and in the confusion, Bundy got the other cuff on, but he accidentally put both cuffs on the same wrist, allowing his would-be victim to open the car door and escape. But Bundy's desires raged inside him uncontrollably, and he couldn't even let night fall before he struck again, when later that evening he pulled the same trick on 17-year-old high school student Deborah Jean Kent, 20 miles away in the town of Bountiful. Deborah would not be as fortunate as Carol before her, and after her disappearance, the school's drama teacher and other students all described seeing a man pacing in the rear of the auditorium shortly before. By November, a horrified Elizabeth Clofer, who was seeing Bundy again, saw that women were now disappearing in the area Bundy had moved to, and she again called King County law enforcement. Bundy was steadily rising on the Lake Sammamish suspect list, but due to their most reliable witness being unable to identify him from a photo lineup, they couldn't make a move. Horrified, Clofer made a third call to law enforcement the next month, this time to Salt Lake City. Bundy was added to their list of suspects, but they too lacked any credible forensic evidence, so Bundy again remained free. In fact, the next month, after final exams, he visited Clofer back in Seattle, who did not tell him of her 3 calls to police. But the cunning killer somehow figured out suspicions were running high, because when he returned to Utah, he immediately shifted his operations eastward to Colorado, striking first 400 miles southeast of Salt Lake City, when he abducted and killed Karen Campbell right from her Snowmass Village hotel hallway. After this, he continued even further eastward into Colorado, using his old technique of posing on crutches to lure 26-year-old ski instructor Julie Cunningham into a false sense of security before clubbing her in the head and abducting her. April and May would see 1 more female vanish each, 25-year-old Denise Oliverson and 12-year-old Lynette Culver, respectively. On August 16th of 1975, Bundy was cruising a residential area in the Salt Lake City suburb of Granger, scoping it out in the pre-dawn hours of the morning. This aroused the suspicion of Utah Highway Patrol Officer Bob Hayward, who began following him. As soon as Bundy saw the patrol car, he took off at a high speed. When Hayward caught up to Bundy, he noticed the passenger seat of his VW had been removed and placed on the back seats. Under it were a ski mask, a mask fashioned from pantyhose, a crowbar, handcuffs, trash bags, a coil of rope, an ice pick, and other items which were initially assumed to be just burglary tools. Bundy tried to explain the items away, saying the ski mask was for skiing, but an astute Hayward remembered the car and suspect description from the DeRanche kidnapping and arrested him. Police searched his apartment and found a guide to Colorado ski resorts with a checkmark by the Wildwood Inn and a brochure that advertised the Bountiful High School play where Deborah Kent had disappeared from. But this was still not sufficient evidence, and amazingly the serial killer who had dozens of bodies to his name was released, quote, on his own recognizance. But the walls were closing in on the charismatic law student as Salt Lake City police placed him on a 24-hour surveillance and continued to be fed information by Elizabeth Clover, who reported finding strange items in both her and Bundy's apartments, including crutches, surgical gloves, and a sack of women's clothing. She reported she would wake up in the middle of the night to find Bundy under the covers examining her body with a flashlight. When Bundy sold his Volkswagen Beetle to a Midvale teenager that September, police immediately impounded it, and FBI technicians found hairs from Karen Campbell, Melissa Smith, and Carol DeRanche. And on October 2nd, DeRanche picked Bundy out of a lineup as the man who had abducted her under the pseudonym Officer Rosalind. With this, Bundy was finally charged with the aggravated kidnapping and criminal assault of Carol DeRanche. But incredibly, he was freed after his parents paid just $15,000 for his bail. Even more incredibly, the woman who had called police on him multiple times with suspicions he was a serial killer, Elizabeth Clover, allowed him to live with her in Seattle between his indictment and trial. She's quoted as saying, "When Ted and I stepped on the porch to go somewhere, so many unmarked police cars started up that it sounded like the beginning of the Indy 500. Pick a side, Elizabeth." In November, the three principal investigators on Bundy's case, one from Utah, Washington, and Colorado each, met with 30 detectives and prosecutors from 5 states for what would be known as the Aspen Summit. While all left the meeting sure Bundy was the monster responsible for the murders, all also agreed that more hard evidence was needed. So in February of 1976, he was found guilty of kidnapping and assault in the DeRanche case, and given 1 to 15 years in Utah State Prison, giving authorities all the time they would need to pin him with murder without worrying about him walking the streets and posing a danger to any more young and innocent girls. But they wouldn't need nearly that long, as later that month authorities charged him with the murder of Karen Campbell. In almost any other murder Monday, this would be the end of the story. Charge, jail, execution, and that's it. But as we've already learned, Bundy had a habit of breaking the mold. On June 7, 1977, Bundy was transported from Garfield County Jail in Glenwood Springs to Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen for a preliminary hearing. Due to him serving as his own attorney, he was excused by the judge from wearing handcuffs or leg shackles. During a recess, he was allowed access to the courthouse's law library to research his case, and Teddy Boy slid in behind a bookcase, opened a window, climbed out, and jumped 2 stories onto the ground below, injuring his right ankle. He shed his outer layer of clothing and hiked southward onto Aspen Mountain, limping through the forest, lost and wandering on his injured ankle, breaking into a cabin and then camping trailer and stealing food, clothing, and a rifle. Not only was one of the worst serial killers in history loose, but he now was armed. Luckily, he was not 100% due to being injured and sleep deprived, and his car was seen swerving, pulled over, and Bundy was finally put back in prison for good. Right? No. Again, were this any other Murder Monday segment, that would probably be the case. But Teddy Boy had other plans, and over the next 6 months saved up $500, smuggled primarily in from girlfriend Carol Ann Boone. Having acquired a floor plan of the prison and a hacksaw blade from other inmates, Bundy waited until the other inmates were showering and sawed a hole between the steel reinforcing bars in the ceiling of his cell, and he began exploring the space and making practice runs. Amazingly, when an informant in the prison filed multiple reports of movement within the ceiling at night, they were not investigated. On the night of December 30th, with most of the staff in the jail on Christmas break and non-violent prisoners on furlough with their families, Bundy realized it was the perfect time to strike and crawled through the ceiling and into the empty apartment of the chief jailer, who was out with his wife, and he changed into street clothes he got from the jailer's closet and walked right out the front door of the prison to freedom. After a car he had stolen broke down, Bundy hitchhiked to the city of Vail, took a bus to Denver, and then used his $500 he had saved to board a flight to Chicago that next morning. He was already off his flight and roaming the streets of Chi-Town by the time the jail skeleton crew realized he was gone the next day at 12 noon. Unfortunately, the amount of lives that were ruined by Ted Bundy after law enforcement's ineptness was exploited are nearly too many to count. As it appears, Bundy realized his final time as a free man was limited, and he appeared to go for broke, beginning a streak in Florida that saw him attack 4 girls within just 15 minutes of each other in Florida State University's Chi Omega sorority house, killing 2 and permanently injuring 2 more. Immediately after leaving the campus, he struck again just 8 blocks away, attacking another FSU student, Cheryl Thomas, dislocating her shoulder and fracturing her jaw and skull in 5 places. Luckily, Cheryl would join Bundy's previous 2 victims in surviving, though she too was left with permanent injuries, including deafness and equilibrium damage that ended her promising dancing career. On February 8th, Bundy drove 155 miles east to Jacksonville in a stolen FSU van and attempted to lure 14-year-old Lizzie Parmenter into the van by posing as Richard Burton of the fire department. But luckily for the innocent young girl, who was a daughter of a Jacksonville Police Department's chief of detectives, her older brother challenged Bundy and caused him to flee. Bundy wasn't big on challenging men, apparently. But Parmenter's fortunes became another innocent young girl's demise, as unfortunately Bundy was able to claim one more young victim in his 3rd and final streak of terror on the opposite side of the country from where he started. 12-year-old Kimberly Leach of Lake City was summoned to her homeroom to retrieve a purse and never returned to class. Her partial remains were found 7 weeks later in a pig farrowing shed near Suwannee River State Park, 35 miles northwest of where she had disappeared from, having been raped with her underwear nearby containing Bundy's semen, an autopsy showing Bundy had disposed of her by cutting her throat. On February 15th at 1 a.m., Bundy was nearing the Alabama line from Florida after driving westward through the Florida Panhandle, when police officer David Lee pulled him over after a check of the VW Beetle Bundy was driving showed it stolen. I'm not sure if Bundy had a special affinity for these vehicles or if they were just easy to steal, but either way, the vehicle he began his murder spree with would be the same kind he ended it with, although not without a fight. When told he was under arrest, he kicked Lee's legs out from under him and took off running. Lee fired a warning shot, then a second round, gave chase, and tackled Bundy. Bundy nearly wrestled Lee's gun away from him, but luckily the officer gained control of him and placed him under arrest. Still unaware of just who he had arrested, the FBI most wanted Ted Bundy told him, "I wish you had just killed me." This is the first Murder Monday that has spanned 2 video episodes, and to be honest, it could have been 10. But for a series that emphasizes brevity and attempts to offer a comprehensive solution to cases in a short period of time as an alternative to all the multi-hour documentaries out there, many details have been left out. Bundy's trials alone could take up a video or 2. I recommend checking out Aaron Banks' Crime Piper blog for more information if you need to fill in some pieces. On February 10th, 1980, Bundy was sentenced for a 3rd time to death by electrocution for his Florida deeds. As the sentence was announced, he stood and shouted, "Tell the jury they were wrong." While conjugal visits were not allowed at Railford Prison, inmates were known to pool their money in order to bribe guards to allow them intimate time alone with their female visitors. And what do you know? In October of 1981, Carol Ann Boone gave birth to a daughter by Bundy. While on death row, Ted Bundy gave many interviews, most of which are available online today. He confessed and detailed many of his crimes and murders in both these interviews and discussions with investigators. While the true number is unknown, he has confessed to 30 homicides that he committed in 7 states between 1974 and 1978. His execution was postponed and stayed on numerous occasions, as amazingly he had a throng of supporters fighting for him to remain alive, using the excuse that it could lead to him revealing more information, even seeking executive clemency. But the families of his victims weren't having it, and on January 24th, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed via electric chair at 7:16 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. He was 42 years old. Despite his supporters, hundreds of revelers who saw the monster for who he was danced and sang outside during his execution, setting off fireworks in a pasture across the street. And as the white hearse carrying his body departed from the prison, a crowd erupted in cheers. The bloody reign of Ted Bundy was finally over. This has been Murder Monday. I'll see you next time.